Good afternoon. I'd like to call the Rules and City Government Committee meeting to order. Please note for the record, both Alderman Arnett and Alderman Channelmeyer are present. I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Next item is approval of, business and miscellaneous. Approval of the minutes from the January 6th meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor of approving the minutes as written, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the next item is election of chairman pursuant to City Code Section 2.16.120. Every year, we have an election of the chairman for each of our standing committees. The idea is to give everyone the experience and the opportunity to chair various committees. So I will entertain a motion of a chairman for this committee.
I nominate Alderwoman Finlayson.
Second.
Okay, without further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And thank you. And if at any point you would like to step up and chair this committee, please don't hesitate. Okay, next item is legislation. 02522, Revenue and Finance, Purchasing and Procurement, Prevailing Wage and Local Hiring. And I won't read all of that. This has been on our agenda a number of times. And for this meeting, we've asked that Director Gerald be present to help. Please come up. And we had asked that Director Dickinson be here. And I think she's going to be on call, I hope.
She's working from home, so she said she was available, but she couldn't come in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Office of Law.
Well, that's what I was getting ready to ask. Ms. Leonard, City Attorney, do you want to step up also so that we can get your opinion? And Ms. Gutierrez, are you here for this legislation or are you here for the rentals?
Rental.
Yeah, okay. Okay, Alderman Channelmeyer, this is your legislation. Do you want to give a brief prelude?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Before we let staff speak to it?
Yes, Madam Chair. 02522 was based upon, very heavily upon what Anne Arundel County passed for its prevailing wage legislation. My rationale being with a lot of infrastructure dollars coming up, I wanted to ensure that our workers would be going through proper apprenticeship programs and be paid a fair day's wage for a fair day's work. The initial legislation had some provisions that the staff took issue with, but after working with them over the past several months, we believe we've come up with a pretty good piece of legislation and a great compromise. I had one further meeting with the directors and Manager Malinoff yesterday to go through everything, and I'll hand it off to Director Gerald.
So do you want to take this time to go through what those changes were, what the issues were, and then how they were resolved? I'm not seeing it as something that's attached.
A lot of it, just amendments, the Chandlemeyer amendments 1 through 7, and then Arnett Amendment 1A, which just clarifies stuff. Most of those were just some reducing some of the strictness of the regulations to make it easier on staff. There was one amendment that I made because I referenced a law that didn't actually exist, so we put the correct law in there. And that was the Annapolis Public Information Act versus the Maryland Public Information Act. And essentially what it does, it takes a lot of regulatory burden off of our finance team, off of our Public Works team, and puts the enforcement of this under the city manager or their designee.
May I ask Ms. Kalin,
And there
did we give a favorable or unfavorable to any of the 7 amendments thus far?
No, all of them were recommended favorably.
Okay, so we start from the beginning. So Alderman Channelmeyer, I'm going to ask you to be very specific in telling us what the amendments are, what they're correcting, so that we can respond appropriately.
Okay. Let me pull them all up. I do want to also state for the record, there is an updated fiscal impact note that was just posted.
Do we have that attached?
It is on Legistar.
So it's not,
Yeah, Ms. Jackson, could you get that attached for us so we have access to it during this meeting?
Lots of things. All right. So Amendment 1 changed the director and department from the finance director and finance department to the city manager or their designee. And that was because it was felt by having conversations with Director Dickinson, Director Jarrell, and Manager Malinoff that the city manager would be best equipped to handle this type of regulation and overwatch. And then that was Amendment 1, and then there is Amendment 1A, which just goes through and ensures that city manager or their designee replaces the word director and department on every single thing, just to keep the language consistent. And those were each recommended favorably.
So 1A is simply adding to Amendment 1, substituting director and his or her designee throughout the entire document. Is that correct?
Amendment 2 is...
Do we want to vote on these individually, or?
They've already been voted on.
Oh, I'm sorry. I asked if we had voted on any of them.
Every single one's been voted on and favored recommendedly.
I'm sorry?
Including 1A.
Okay, so we have already voted in support of 1A.
Yes.
Okay, well, that was my question early on. So Amendment 2 has been voted on, and how?
Favorably.
Yes, favorable.
you know,
Okay. And Amendment 3, again, has been voted on favorably.
Mm-hmm.
And Amendment 4?
Amendment 4 was eliminating the specific number of 51% local hiring and putting in as best efforts to do majority local hiring, and that was recommended favorably.
And we voted on 4 also?
Yes, Madam Chair.
And 5?
5 was the goof where I referenced the Annapolis Public. Oh wait, no, that wasn't 5. 5 was recommended favorably as well, but it's just referencing the Public Information Act requests.
Okay, but we do have a registered vote in favor of 5?
Yes, Madam Chair.
And 6?
6 was putting city manager instead of director for maintaining finance records, city manager, the designee, and it was also recommended favorably.
And we voted on 6. This was one that I thought there were some questions about as far as the line of responsibility.
I believe we voted on it favorably. Ms. Jackson, is that correct?
All of them have been,
So the thought process on all of those was not that the city manager himself or herself would be doing those tasks, but would be able to assign it as they saw fit to the department. So right now it's not clear which department between finance and public works is going to do what. So that'll have to be worked out. So it made sense to assign the responsibility to the city manager so the city manager can then assign it appropriately.
We are in the process, I hope, of amending the code that will require a staffing note to all legislation. Just like we have a fiscal note, we need to have a staffing note because we keep creating work that we put on people's plates. with little consideration, I feel, this is just me speaking, with little consideration for what's already on that plate. And so if we're going to be creating work, we need to be providing staff to do the work. So that raises this question, is one more thing we're putting on the city manager's plate. The intent in creating the city manager, which I sponsored the legislation to create that position, but the idea all along was to create a department, not a single person who was going to be running the city. I mean, that's impossible. And we have not risen to the level of providing adequate staff. And Mr. Malinoff isn't here, but Mr. Jarrow, you were in this position. And it may sound like a small thing to say, well, he can delegate it, but it's still one more responsibility that has to be delegated. So do you think, based on your experiences, that this is a doable line of authority or responsibility?
Yes, I mean, certainly for the city manager, that's a one-time decision of who's going to be assigned it. So that's not an ongoing process. But there is going to be additional either contract or staff responsibilities associated with this. So that's what the fiscal note describes, although we're not able to figure out exactly what the total cost is going to be because we don't know how many of these are going to have to be done and how much effort it's going to take for each contract to do the monitoring. So I think the fiscal note says that we think if it's by a consultant, it'll be roughly $100 per hour fully burned, so profit, overhead, all those types of things, plus the direct salary of the person. But we're not sure how many hours each year would be required to do it because it's a new program and we just don't know how much effort's going to be required.
Okay, thank you. Alderman Arnett?
So hearkening back to the staff report and remembering things that the finance director said, she felt there was going to be an additional record-keeping burden on both the contractor and the finance department. I never could get a full sense of, how many contracts, well, it would be all future contracts presumably, and how much that level of effort would be. But I did get the sense from Ms. Dickinson that she felt that it would take up some considerable amount of time to do the record keeping. I don't know, maybe Mr. Alderman Schoenemeyer, you have a sense of what the level of record keeping is. I'm not familiar with this, or possibly the Office of Law would know what kinds of records we would be required to keep. And I assume the purpose for keeping records is to assure anyone that we are, in fact, doing prevailing wages. And that would be a continuing test that would have to be. Right.
We would have to collect all the certified payrolls from the contractors and then do some oversight to make sure that the employers are getting paid the proper salary or the proper wages. And then for some period of time, they would have to be kept on record in case there was a protest or a claim against those. So yeah, that's the crux of the issue. And then there should also be periodic, what we used to call in the federal government labor standards interviews done by somebody where they go out and talk to the employees and make sure that they're getting properly paid and getting all their benefits and not just rely on the payroll records, but actually talk to the employees as well. So all those are going to take some effort, and right now we just don't know how much that's going to add up to.
So if people are paid biweekly, as in the federal government, or weekly, or however they're paid, monthly, we would have to review those payroll records periodically, every time pay is given, and
Right.
it would presume that somebody who's reviewing it would understand what the prevailing wage is. And
Right.
make sure
They would have the prevailing wages here, and then they would have the payroll records, and they could compare to make sure they're getting paid enough and making sure they're getting the benefits that they're supposed to be getting, and aren't getting, dinged for things they shouldn't be, on the withdrawal side.
Do we have any, and again, I think this would unfortunately be something the finance director might have more than anybody else, but any indication that we're not paying prevailing wage on any of the contracts that we've let over time?
Well, right now, unless it's a Davis-Bacon project, because of federal funding, we don't have a prevailing wage. So we have nothing to compare. We don't have, a sheet of paper says you have to pay this amount. We allow the market to determine what the construction rates are. And right now, because there's so much work going on and such a demand for construction workers, pay has gone up a lot. So, I think for at least the near term and maybe the midterm, employees are getting paid very well. It's when the economy turns and the construction market takes a downturn and there's not as much work that this is a valuable tool to have.
There's also, if I may, Madam Chair, additional benefits to prevailing wage legislation because it has been shown to boost worker safety. It's been shown to boost overall worker quality, and there's several pieces of data and studies that I've shared with each of you showing that projects are less likely to run over budget or over cost.
But if I may rejoin on that, Madam Chair, how would finance, or who would be monitoring improvements in worker safety? I mean, I can't see that as, maybe our, who's the person that used to be Mary that would...
Yeah, Corey.
Corey.
Yeah, we certainly keep track of safety on our construction projects. That's a very big issue, both for contractors and for the owner to ensure that the jobs are safe. They have to carry insurance, the contractors do. So like when you have auto accidents, your insurance rates go up. But if they have safety issues or accidents on project sites, their insurance goes up. So that's something that every contractor is very concerned about. So we can monitor that, certainly.
But we're monitoring it now?
We know when there are accidents or safety issues on contracts, so we don't actively go out and inspect to make sure that the project sites, they do that themselves. They're self-policing, but we know when there's accidents or safety issues.
So to say what I thought when I read the initial staff report is that there would be significant burden, but it wasn't clear to me that the juice was worth the squeeze. If we're going to be monitoring safety and training and things like that, which it sounds like we're doing already, and now we're adding a significant review of payroll records, which is going to take somebody time to leaf through, whether we review them quarterly or however. And then given the document that we received from the Office of Law that went through all of the processes that we go through now when we let contracts, I'm having a hard time figuring out what it is that we're improving and what it is that we're getting by adding this administrative burden to this process. But I will say that the tone, again, was my reading of the staff report was, and in fact, I think the statement was made on a recent contract, we only had one bidder, and it is very hard to get people to bid on contracts in Annapolis because of, although the rigor is already existing, are we in fact putting ourselves at a disadvantage in adding this additional burden? And I think that's where I'm coming down on this is the juice worth the squeeze? Are we getting enough value added that it's worth putting this additional step in code?
I'm not sure that I can answer that. I can tell you that project that we just got one bid had unique circumstances because the Naval Academy was at the very same time bidding their seawall project, which drew the same set of contractors and was a much bigger project, so more appealing. So I'm sure a lot didn't bid on ours because they were bidding on that, including Chinbro, who was our favorite contractor because they did the bulkhead and they were the successful bidder on the Naval Academy. But yeah, I mean, that certainly is the sort of the question of the hour, and the policy decision that the council is going to have to make is, you know, you can find literature on both sides, right? Like a lot of things, you can find literature on both sides. Some say that it drives away bidders. Some say it brings in bidders. It brings in the union contractors, which we would certainly welcome. We want as many to bid as possible. So I don't think that this is completely established whether this is a pro or a con. I think it has both pros and cons. We would hope that we could avoid some of the unintended consequences of this, of driving away non-union contractors who may choose not to bid on this. We would hope that that wouldn't happen, but we would hope that all the benefits that Alderman Chandelmeyer mentioned would come to our projects as well. You know, the safety, the staying within costs, the not driving the wages up, but getting at least equal quality. So yeah, I mean, it's debatable, all those things.
Test something with you. My sense is that contracts that are big contracts are likely to be contractors with unions like Whiting Turner and things like that. The one we have coming up with all the work on City Dock, is there a likelihood of a lot of non-union contractors being driven away?
Again, we don't know. We would hope that that would not be the case. We would hope that instead this actually opens the door to bring union contractors in addition. Most of our projects are non-union now, so we would hope that this would bring in the union contractors and there'd be even more competition than there is now.
Alderman Chandelmeyer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to add Whiting Turner's not a union contractor. They're an open shop.
I'm sorry, I can't.
Whiting Turner's not a union-based contractor. They're an open shop.
They're not union, is that what you're saying?
Correct.
I'm having a hard time with the echo.
Sorry. Yeah, they're not a union contractor, open shop. Just for clarification, as far as the safety standards that I was referencing, that doesn't come from increased monitoring. That usually ends up coming from people coming in. Prevailing wage contracts tend to bring people in, whether it's union shops or non-union shops, going through apprenticeship programs, which increases the overall training and has people, journeymen, working with apprentices. So that way they are watching, making sure that the job is done right, safely, and correctly. And that's kind of inherent to the prevailing wage program and the safety benefits that it offers.
Madam Chair.
One other thing, I apologize. As well as there's a couple data points, studies that I've shared with you all several times showing that the impact of prevailing wage legislation does not have a negative impact on total number of bidders. It does open things up to certain shops that may be unwilling to go into a prevailing wage jurisdiction or a non-prevailing wage jurisdiction because they know that they're going to try and be competing with firms that are keeping costs down, usually due through cuts in labor.
Alderman.
So on that last point, I recall you mentioning studies, but I don't recall having studies shared. I do make it a point to read the studies that you give us, but setting that aside, I guess I'm wondering if there's a return from this, as if we find that it is putting us in a disadvantaged situation, it's pushing the cost of our projects up, or for some reason we don't get the full complement of bidders. And I guess this is a question for law. The only way to return to where we are now is to have an ordinance to remove this from our code?
That would be correct.
What if we did a sunsetting? What if we passed this with a review in 2 years or something like that, that we could look at the whether it's been positive or negative, both for the cities but also for the workers, because really, as Democrats, we do worry about workers. more than most do, but
Yeah, I would just say that it takes a while to see the results from this, because you'll recall that when this first came up, I had reached out to the county, to the public works director there, because they've had this, I think, for 6 or 8 months, something like that, just to see what trends they're seeing.
yeah.
And it was too early at that point, 6 or 8 months after they had implemented to really have a feel for whether bids were going up, whether they were getting more or less bidders, all the things that we're concerned about. It was too soon to tell. So, 2 years may not be enough time to really have good data on what the impact is.
And who's going to be around 2 years from now? Just the one.
Ashley?
Well, and you're making a good point about how long it takes us to figure out how it's functioning. We know that when we impose policies, sometimes it takes multiple years for us to figure out whether it's working or not. So the question for me is, should we put something in place that we're not going to be able to determine the effectiveness of it in a year or 2 or even 5 years? The fact that the county is working on it, in my mind, it would stand to reason that we'd see how it's working out there. We know what the financial implications are by virtue of the county, but do we know the other impacts?
No, and I'm not even sure we know the financial impacts yet, other than the fact that they had to hire a few people to administer the program. But as far as the impact on construction costs or other factors like that, I don't think we even know that yet. We just know what the cost of the county to administer the program is.
And that's what I was referring to, the staffing costs, because we
right.
know that, but we don't know
Yeah.
much of anything else.
Right.
So. Ms. Leonard, did you want to add anything else?
No, I mean, I don't think so. I agree, especially given the county does probably more bidding than we do. So the problem is, depending on what you're bidding in any given year and what projects roll up, it could take a long time to see any trends, just because bidding's not like a consistent thing. Some bids are consistent, but then you have a lot of one-off type projects, so it's hard to tell.
Thank you. Alderman Gay, did you have your hand up?
Thank you. I'm sure he has, but have you sent an example of a city or municipality of our size using this, or have they all been of the sample sizes have all been of large cities?
Most of the studies and things have been done at either county level or slightly bigger city level.
Okay.
Okay, so we have already voted on Amendment 6, correct? Ms. Jackson?
I'd like to raise the fact that the amendment that I made to the legislation doesn't seem to be captured in the amendment ascribed to me. If you look at the...
You're 1A, right?
Well, I had an amendment. If you look at page 3 of the legislation, there was under number 3, starting at line 6, it was any physical public betterment or improvement, but then B was acquisition of property